parents? What if I had been raised a different way? What if I chose to go to a different college? Or it's related to the future. What if in the future something goes wrong? What if in the future I haven't saved up enough finances to retire? What if in the future events in church don't go the way that I expect them to go? What if in the future something breaks apart? What if in the future I have a sickness or a pain or a frustration? So here we relegate our time, we relegate our attention, we relegate our thoughts to the realm of the what ifs. What if this could have occurred? And it's almost an obsession with how things should have been, or an obsession with how things should be in the future. Verse 11 says that Moses said, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt?" This is what they're saying to Moses, "that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you done this in bringing us out here? Was it because there were no graves in Egypt?" Do you hear what they're saying to him? "You brought us out here to die. Weren't there any graves in Egypt? I mean, you could have just killed us all back in Egypt and it would have been okay. Just taken us all out there. But now you've brought us here, and you've brought us here to die." Moses, this is a claim against Moses' leadership as well as a claim against God. Moses, you've brought us out here to die. You didn't know what you were doing. Maybe you weren't really following God. Maybe you weren't really following the Lord. And it's also a statement about who God is. God has brought us into something that He can't handle. God has brought us into a situation that isn't going to occur or isn't going to work out the way that we thought God was going to make it work out, or God was going to make it occur. And so here we're at the what if. What if this doesn't work out? What if this doesn't matter? What if God can't come through? What if we get pressed against the Red Sea and God doesn't come through for us? I mean, you've probably thought that before. What if you get the test result? Or what if you get placed in a situation? What if you feel like God has placed in your heart a dream for the future, or God has placed in your heart the idea about what He wants you to accomplish in your life, and you get to the point and there you are, and then it's like God doesn't even come through for you. God doesn't work a miracle. God doesn't restore a loved one. God doesn't come through for you. And so there you are at the Red Sea, and God isn't coming through, and God isn't working things out. And so you become obsessed with the past. And here they're obsessed with Egypt. You can say that about the Hebrew children. They're very obsessed with Egypt. They think Egypt was the greatest place ever. Now, does the Bible ever give the indication that Egypt is the greatest place ever? Well, no. But they think that Egypt is the greatest place ever. And many times in our lives, we're obsessed with the past to the degree that we think that the past was the greatest time of our life. We think that events in the past, we think that occurrences in the past, that was the best time. I mean, you can think right now, the best time in my life was when I was 4 years old. Or the best time of my life when I was 10 years old. The best time of my life was when I was in high school. Those high school years, they were the greatest thing that ever happened in my life. And if you were in high school right now, you would be thinking to yourself, I cannot wait to get out of this place, because one day I'm going to accomplish so much in my life and so many things are going to happen. But right now, no, that's not the case. Right now you're thinking, if I could just go back, if I could be in high school again, if I could just do things over again, then things would be so much different. I read a quote once, and the person said, the way to not have regret in the future is to do the opposite of what your mind is telling you to do now. So, you hear that. Now think through that for one moment. So you're trying to make a decision now. Well, if you don't want to regret it in the future, just do the opposite. And then of what your mind is telling you to do. Just do the opposite of what your inclination is telling you to do. And then you're never going to regret the future, right? Is that right? You're never going to regret the future. Well, that's wrong, because then you're going to get to the future and you're going to think, well, if I just done what I was going to do anyway, then I wouldn't have any regret. And so it's the constant conflict and the constant thought of what if events could be different. What if events could occur in a different manner? What if things could work? What if the past could have been different than the past really was? I don't know if it would be different or not. Let me tell you a story for a moment. This is a story about how to run a birthday. I don't know if you've ever run your birthday before or not, but it's probably 7 years old or so, and there was this movie that came out, when I was 7 years old. It was called Dick Tracy. Isn't that a great movie? I don't know if you've seen it before, but Warren Beatty starred in Dick Tracy. Some of you have seen this movie. Some of you are like, I've never seen this movie before in my life. But it's kind of a weird classic movie right now. But there was a movie that came out, Dick Tracy. It's probably 7 years old. My birthday was coming around, and when the movie came out, they released all of these action figures, all of these toys from Dick Tracy. And I became obsessed with this movie. It was like a crime drama. It was really cheesy what it is if you've ever seen it before. It was like a crime drama combined with a superhero or a comic book character, and so it was just if you ever go back, I've seen the movie a few years ago. If you ever go back and watch, it is like the oddest movie that I've ever seen in my life. It is so incredibly weird, But when I was 7 years old, it was the coolest movie that I'd ever seen in my life, and so I wanted these action figures. And my mom had said to me, "Lucas, what do you want for your birthday?" And I said, "I want some of these Dick Tracy action figures." And she had bought me one before, and if you take the action figure and if you look on the back, it actually shows all of the other action figures they make, okay? And so they made this one particular action figure, and it was called the Blank. So the Blank doesn't have a face, okay? I'm going somewhere with this. The Blank doesn't have the face. This is the main villain in the entire movie. I'm going to spoil it for you now if you haven't seen it before. And if you haven't seen it, you don't want to see it. Don't even worry about it. But it was the main villain in the whole movie, was the Blank. And I told my mom, I said, the one figure I want is this figure that doesn't have a face. I mean, you think you could have peeled the face off of another figure, but I want this figure that does not have the face. I want this action figure. It's like the coolest toy that I've ever seen before. My birthday rolled around, and I got a toy that looked like an action figure, and it was wrapped up, and I unwrapped it, and it wasn't the Blank. It was a different figure. And I remember, I think I kind of tossed it down. I said, this isn't the figure I wanted. I wanted the Blank, but you got me this figure instead. And my mom felt bad. She shouldn't have felt bad. She should have said, you spoiled brat, this is the toy you get. But she felt bad, and she said, I'm sorry, I couldn't find that figure anywhere, but I got you this toy instead. And so I said, this isn't the one I want. I mean, this is a terrible birthday. And so the rest of my birthday was ruined, because I didn't get this action figure. And the next week was probably ruined as well because I didn't get the action figure. The next month was probably ruined as well because I didn't get the action figure. Why? Because I was obsessed with something that I couldn't have. And the reason that the what-ifs affect the past and the reason that the what-ifs affect the future is because we become obsessed with things that we can't have. We have become obsessed with stuff that isn't going to... Can you go back into the past and change it? No. Can you go to the future and know everything that's going to occur in the future? Well, no, you can't. But you can become obsessed with the what if. What if this could have been different? What if this could be different in the future? What if this could work out? What's really interesting is I was watching, I think, a documentary or something on the pop culture. And it was one of those, another odd show, a documentary on pop culture. And for some reason, the Blank came up in this documentary, this Dick Tracy figure. Now, this is what's really interesting. The action figure that I told my mom, I want this figure, my birthday's going to be spoiled if you don't find it. The action figure actually wasn't released anywhere but Canada. Isn't that interesting to think? So I was holding my mom to an expectation that could not be fulfilled unless she drove to Winnipeg or somewhere else and got it. But, it could not be found except for in Canada. And the reason is because the Blank character, who was actually in the movie, played by the singer Madonna, the Blank character becomes the main villain. It's getting odder, isn't it? Becomes the main villain in the movie. And so she wears a blank mask. And at the end of the movie, she takes off the mask, and you realize that it's not a he, it's a she. It's not some random person, but it's the Madonna who's playing the main villain in the entire movie. And so the reason they would not release the action figure, except for in Canada, is because they didn't want to spoil the movie. Well, they didn't realize that nobody was actually going to go watch the movie, but they didn't want to spoil the ending of the movie, and so the figure was not released. And so here's the standard I'm holding my mom to. Here's the standard that's going to make my birthday work. Here's the standard that's going to make me happy as a child. It's the standard. If you find this toy, then suddenly I'm going to be content. If you find this toy, then suddenly I'm going to be okay. And here's the what if. What if you find it? What if you can't find it? Here is the what if of the Exodus as well. They're there, they're in Egypt. They're saying, Moses, you should have just left us here to die, or you should have left us back in Egypt to die. And so here they are. They're thinking to themselves, we know what Moses was up to. This is what I'm thinking. I know what my mom was up to. She knew the action figure that I wanted, and she didn't get it. We know what Moses is up to. This is what Moses is up to. Moses brought us out here because he wanted us to die. And this is what God is up to. God is up to this. God brought us out here because he wanted us to die. Because God is intentionally planning to inflict harm. God is intentionally planning to do something evil in your life. Are there no graves in Egypt? I mean, you could have left us in Egypt and we could have died there. And basically they're saying, Moses, you planned all this. You planned all this. You know what would have changed their perspective? If they knew that God was about to show up. If they knew that the Red Sea was about to part. If they knew that they were going to go to the Promised Land. But right now it's the what if. What if we're going to die here? Well, maybe the what if is because we've hit the wall. And the wall is realizing that the past may not be what we want it to be. And the wall may be realizing that the future is unknown, but God is still the one who's in charge of it. And they're saying, well, God, you obviously can't be in charge of this. Here we are, we're going to die. That's it. End of discussion. Nothing is going to go our way. And said they've hit the wall and it's done. You know, Northwestern University in Illinois, they sent out a random digit telephone survey to 370 American men and women. According to the results, relationship-based regrets outweigh those of education or career. Now listen to this. 18% of respondents regretted a past romance, and 16% had family-related regrets. Education was 13%, career was 12%, finances 10% fell in the middle range, while parenting and health made up 9 to 6% respectively. Surprised? Well, you're probably not, according to the study. Relationships, and this is including family and friends as well, have loads of science-based and science-backed health perks. People crave strong social structures around them. This means, according to this study, that a combined 43% of our regrets are tied to relationships including romance, family, or parenting, while work and life regrets, career regrets, and finance is about 35%. So that means that means your relationships with spouse, family, friend, parents, children, and then career, finance, and where you're going in the future in career and finance is the primary thing that we all have regrets about. It's the primary thing that we all have worries about in the future. And you see this in the eyes of people as well. Some of you this morning, you're thinking to yourself, what if I had raised my children in church? What if I had taken my kids to church more? What if I had taught them the Scripture more? What if I had prayed with my kids? What could I have done differently with my children so that they would not have gone in a direction right now that I feel like they shouldn't be going in? And so there is regret there. And you're thinking to yourself, what if? It's a relationship-based concern. Others of you are thinking to yourself, well, what if I had got that job promotion a few years ago? I wouldn't be in the situation that I'm in right now. I wouldn't be financially strained. I wouldn't be worried about the future. This other person who I may have had the same credentials as, he got the position or she got the position, but I didn't get it. What if I had got that position? And so you're obsessed with the what if. You're obsessed with thinking, if this had occurred in my life, if this had worked out in my life, then things surely would have been different now. What if the events had worked out? What if the events had been different? And you can see this here. They're thinking to themselves, what if we stayed in Egypt? If we had stayed in Egypt, we would have had food. If we had stayed in Egypt, we would have had our houses that we had built. If we had stayed in Egypt, we would have had some sort of security. Now, the Egyptian leaders may have been driving us like slaves. But if we had stayed in Egypt, we would have had some sort of security. If we had stayed in Egypt, we wouldn't be afraid of outside sources attacking us. If we had stayed there, everything would have been maybe not the best, but it would have been okay. Someone once said, you can't change the past, but you can run the person that you're becoming by worrying about the future, and you can run the present as well. Can't change the past, can't just worry about the present, but you can run, or the future, but you can run the present. You can run what's going on now. The Israelites are running what's going on now because they're saying to themselves, we should have stayed in Egypt, now we're here, we're stuck. We have nowhere to go. We are absolutely stuck. This is it, it's over. And so letting go of the what if is letting go of the obsession with the past. It's also letting go of running the risk of completely ruining the future. And you think to yourself, Well, what if this had occurred? Well, quit saying, what if? I think the point of the Israelites is quit saying, what if? Start saying to yourself, what is God about to do? What's about to happen? What can God do right now? How can God work right now? You can't change the past. You can't become so obsessively worried about the future. But what can God do right now? Because God is the one ultimately who's writing the story here. Moses brings a reminder that the future is outside of their control. The past is even outside of their control. Verse 12 says, "Is not this what we said to you in Egypt, to leave us alone that we may die with the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." And Moses said, "Fear not, stand firm, see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work out for you today." Stand firm. Stand firm, because God is going to work something out. And here is the situation that we face right now. We say, well, what if things could be different? What if maybe I could have been born in a different situation? What if I had been born a prince in England? I mean, wouldn't that be great? What if you had? What if I had been born a king or a queen? Well, wouldn't that be a better life? I mean, what if things really could be different in that regard? You know, if you think about the what ifs so long, now pay attention. If you think about the what ifs so long, what you're going to do is you're going to convince yourself that something that isn't better is really better. You follow? You're going to convince yourself that something that isn't better is really better if you follow the line of the what if. How does that happen? You're going to convince yourself that Egypt is better than the uncertainty of going to the promised land. I mean, they're convinced here. Egypt is the best thing ever. Egypt is where we need to go. And so you think you have a better story to tell about yourself than God. You know what kind of story you're going to come up with. You think to yourself, I know what I want my life to look like. I know what I want my future to look like. I know what I want my life to look like. And I can tell this great story about how Lucas's life should look. Or you can tell this great story about what your life should look like. And this is the story you come up with. Egypt. You see that? It's Egypt. This is the great story, and God said, this is the conclusion of the story. This is the best you have. So when we become in control of our own lives, and we think that we're the ones who are in charge, and we want to lead ourselves in our own direction, we come to the conclusion that Egypt must be a better place. What if instead we understand that without Egypt, there isn't a promised land? Now here's the contrast. One is saying, well, Egypt is the best place ever. The other one is saying, maybe without Egypt, there isn't a promised land. So we let go of the what ifs. We let go of Egypt. We let go of thinking that Egypt is the be-all, end-all, that Egypt is everything. And with that, we let go of our intentions. And part of letting go of the future and part of the letting go of the past is letting go of those characteristics that bring us down. So we let go of Egypt. Part of letting go of Egypt is letting go of our ego, of what we think is the right thing to do. Part of letting go of Egypt is letting go of our self-loathing and letting go maybe of our need for results, or letting go of approval from other individuals. It's letting go of worrying about tomorrow. It's letting go of the fear of being unknown. It's letting go of the fear of being unloved. It's letting go of the fear of being without. It's letting go of the fear of being alone. It's letting go of all the things that we can't see. It's letting go of all the what ifs. Letting go of Egypt is letting go of all of the what ifs. What if we let go instead of the meaningless things in life, and we let go of the things that the culture attaches to us that says that it's important? And instead we focus on what God is doing and how God is working. I mean, you can live in Egypt as long as you want. You can wear the mask of the Egyptians. You can play the part of an Egyptian. You can think to yourself, this is all that God has planned for my life. This is all I ever wanted in life. But you're still in Egypt. You're still a slave. You're still bound to fear. You're still bound to foreign powers. You're still bound to a place that God doesn't want you to be. Instead, the call is to remember that Egypt isn't the final place. Egypt is just one place before you get to the promised land. And what if God brought you here, where you are right now, to take you where you're supposed to be? God promised Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Joseph and Moses, all the Hebrew children, They were going to the promised land. You see, Egypt is the temporary location. It is not the destination. Egypt is the temporary stay. It's not the destination. The temporary stay may be slavery, but the forever destination is the fact that you're a son. The temporary stay may be a step back, but the forever destination is that you're moving forward toward what God has called you to do. The temporary stay, the temporary Egypt, it may be failure, but the forever stay is heaven, where you're going to win. I mean, isn't that the best thing about the Bible? We don't have to worry about this. If you believe in Jesus, in the end, this is pretty clear, you're going to win. You're not going to lose, you're going to win. God is going to come through for you. God is going to work things out. You are going to win. The Bible in the New Testament often describes what we see now. It describes life right now as what? As Egypt. This is life right now. It's like Egypt. We're just passing through. It's the temporary stay. Our home is eternal, and our home is in heaven. So what if God brought you here to bring you to where He's called you to be, to bring you to eternal life, and this is just a temporary stay? It's ultimately not the destination, and so you reverse this statement. Let's make the positive statement instead. They're making the negative. Well, what if God brought us out here to die? Were there no graves in Egypt? Make the positive here for a moment. What if God brought you to the point where the Egyptians are chasing you, where you're pinned up against the Red Sea so that He could demonstrate His power? What if God brought you to the point where you feel like you have great loss and great fear, so He makes Himself known to you in such a great way that you understand His character, but also you gain a greater perspective of life in general? And so here's the idea that God is bringing you through Egypt. God didn't bring you to Egypt. God is bringing you through Egypt. God is bringing you through Egypt to get you to where He wants you to be, because God has something greater planned in the future than what you see right now. We read this over and over in the New Testament, that no eye has seen, no ear has heard what God has in store for those who love Him. And so instead of that, often we think to ourselves, well, what if? What if things don't work out? And what if things don't come through? What if things are different? You know, Jesus, of all people, born into the world, God became incarnate. God became man. He was born into the world. God could have chose anything. Jesus could have chose any way, any place, any person to be born from. Now think about this for a moment. Jesus had all the choices before Him. Jesus could have been born a king. Jesus could have been born a prince. He could have been born with all the riches in the world. He could have been born at any time that He chose as well. And Jesus chose to be born at one of the most oppressed times in history as a son of a very poor carpenter and a family that had a somewhat questionable reputation. And yet Jesus enters into the world. And I think there's a reason for that. When Jesus enters into the world, He enters in a way that gets rid of all of our what ifs. What if I'd been born rich? Well, Jesus wasn't. What if I'd been born to a family of influence? Jesus wasn't. What if I'd been born at a different time and in a different place? Well, Jesus wasn't. And so God entered into a situation to show us that all the what-ifs that we have in our mind, they're not the source of our joy. They're not the source of our contentment. And if we could make things different than they are now, that wouldn't be the source of our joy. That wouldn't be the source of our contentment. Because the source of our joy and the source of our contentment ultimately has to be found in the fact that we're not stuck in Egypt, but we're headed to the promised land. That we're going somewhere in the future. And what kills us right now is the what-if. What if the past is different? What if the future is different? It kills us right now. There's an aviation story about a pilot when they were first trying to figure out exactly how planes work and the distance that they could travel. So the pilot took off, and his journey was about a 2-hour journey from one location to another location, from one airport to the other airport, and he needed to get there because times were different and the planes landed different, and he needed to get there. And about halfway through the journey, about an hour in, he heard a gnawing sound in the back of the airplane, a small one-seater airplane. He heard a gnawing sound. And you know what the gnawing sound was, because he had heard it once before. And the gnawing sound was the sound of a rat that had come aboard that airplane. And it was chewing at the wires. And he thought to himself, if this rat, if it hits the wrong wire, this plane is going to immediately crash, and that's it, I'm done. And so he's thinking to himself, I'm halfway between. I could turn around and go back an hour. I can go forward and go an hour. I don't really have anywhere to go. Can't land this plane where I am right now. Trying to fly. So he thinks to himself for a moment, and he begins to ascend. And he begins to ascend higher and higher and higher. He gains altitude. And as he goes higher and higher, he thinks to himself, if I get high enough, this rat's going to freeze out. If I get high enough, this rat's going to stop gnawing at these wires. And finally, he flies high enough. He doesn't hear any chomping. He doesn't hear any rattles. He doesn't hear any noises. And he realizes that he's flown so high and the pressure in that plane has changed so much that this rat is now lifeless. It is now dead. And let me tell you this. That's what the what if is like. You can stay low in Egypt. You can fly and you can hover around here on earth. Or you can realize that your destination is above, that you're headed to the promised land. And instead of worrying if the rat's eating your wire and worrying about the what ifs, you need to keep flying higher toward what God has called you to do. Because that's the person that he's made you to be. That's the promised land you're headed to. And for now, you let go of the what ifs. Would you stand with me this morning? Father, we thank you for this day. Lord, we